Open your Bibles with me to Ephesians chapter 3, continuing our study with the idea that God is able. In Ephesians chapter 3, we find this encouraging verse, verse 20. Now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. He's able to do above all that we ask or think, abundantly so. And this series comes on the heels of a couple of series that we did on the Lordship of Christ and the person and work of Christ. Seeing the humanity of Christ, seeing the deity of Christ. And just wanting to encourage everyone with the real fact that God is able in every situation. God is able in your life and mine. God is able to take care of the details. And we've started out working our way through the book of Genesis. We started out with creation, and Noah, and Joseph. And we saw how Joseph said God was able to take that which is even meant for evil. God made it for good. And then we tracked the children of Israel into Egypt and their time there in Egypt, and then exiting Egypt and through the Red Sea and coming to the Promised Land. They doubted. And God was displeased with that generation and they died. And Moses died. Joshua was raised up to lead the children of Israel into the land. And we saw last week that God was able to raise up, 2 weeks ago, raise up Joshua, lead the children of Israel into the land. And his marvelous blessing was upon them. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like to the children of Israel, out of nowhere, the blessing stopped. And that was because there was sin in the camp. We looked at Achan and that sin last week, and the realization that God is able to uncover even what we think are secret sins, even those sins that we hide. God is able. And we find in Joshua chapter 11 and in verse 23, if you would be turning there, we've tracked the children of Israel into the Promised Land. Joshua leading them. God's blessing was restored after Achan was taken care of and that sin resolved. Joshua was used of God to lead the battles into the Promised Land, and they were victorious. They took the Promised Land. They didn't take it. God gave it to them more accurately. And Joshua 11:23, Joshua took it says, and Joshua took the whole land, and they were able to take it because God gave it to them, according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to their division by their tribes, and the land rested from war. There was finally, after so many years, there was peace. Now, you can read from chapter 13 and verse 1 that there's more to do, but they had a period of peace. Chapter 13 and verse 1, Joshua was old and stricken in years, and the Lord said unto him, Thou art old and stricken in years, and there remaineth yet very much land to be possessed. You know, the spiritual application of that is that we're never done. The victories that we have, the victories that God gives us over sin, the victories that we have in our lives over struggles and circumstances and heartaches and so on, and especially in the realm of striving against sin and that whole work of the flesh against the work of the Spirit, fruits of the flesh against the fruit of the Spirit, whatever victories that we enjoy by God's grace, the battle's really never done while we're on this earth. And we may have great victories today, and there's rest from that, but there's going to be other challenges, and there's going to be other strivings that have to take place. And Joshua's life illustrates that for us. They had found peace. They're in the promised land. They've taken what God said, Moses, here's what I'm giving you. And then, Joshua, you're old. And that happens when you don't die young. And he got old. And he said, thou art old, but there's a lot of land yet to be possessed. And that's just a spiritual truth that in your life and mine we have to keep on striving for that victory. But that's really not my point this morning, that just the realization that God had given them rest. And after a couple of centuries now, turn forward, we're going to pick up the life of Saul briefly. We're not really going for that, but 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8, we're not going to study on Saul today, but just as a reference. From Joshua chapter 11, where we read that they had taken the land and God had given them rest, to 1 Samuel 8, we're looking at a time period of roughly 340 years. So longer than we've been a country, by 100 years or more. And but they're in the land, they've been there now for centuries, but the people clamored. The people of Israel clamored for a king. And they clamored for a king because they wanted to be like the nations around them. And God's like, I'm your king. And you're not like nations around. You're my nation. You're my chosen people. But they clamored for a king. And God gave them what they wanted. It wasn't their best. And be careful what you ask for. He might give it to you. And it's not always for the best. But in 1 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 7, the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. This whole clamoring for a king, this isn't a slap in your face, Samuel. This is a slap in mine. Verse 22 of that same chapter, the Lord said to Samuel, hearken to the voice and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, go ye every man unto his city. And so I'm going to find you a king. And of course you know how that flowed out, that story unfolded. Saul was head and shoulders above the rest. Saul was the man that's who we want to be our king. He's rugged and tough and conquers other people. I mean, he's just a warrior at heart, and that's who we want. And God told Samuel, give them what they want. It's not their best. And they've rejected me in the process. Over a period of time, Saul wasn't working out well. The process of his being king was coming apart. There was the unraveling. The Lord was displeased. The people were displeased. Saul was cowering. You get to the point where you've got Goliath and the armies of Israel, and Saul doesn't seem to be ready to take on the foe. But the young shepherd boy shows up, David. And let's turn to 1 Samuel 17, where we're not really introduced to David, but this is where he begins to take prominence in the Scriptures with one of the most familiar accounts in all of the Word of God. 1 Samuel 17, starting in verse 26. And you remember the account, the 9 foot or so tall Goliath challenges anybody in the armies of Israel. Winner take all. Well, nobody wanted to be the taker of that challenge. And here's Goliath. And there's the armies of Israel. Now David shows up, and his dad has sent him there. And David shows up, and they accuse him of just being nosy and wanting to see, a little kid wanting to see what the grown-ups are doing was the mentality, I think. The brothers pick on him and ridicule him and what'd you do with those few sheep that you had over there? Yeah, we got man stuff to do, little boy. Just run along. And David's response in verse 26, 1 Samuel 17, David spake unto the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David is incensed. David's outraged. What is this? Who is this? Who is this guy? What does he think he's doing against the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou might see the battle. And so he gets ridiculed by his brother. And verse 29 is the text that I really want you to focus in on. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? David asked an earnest question. What have I done wrong? Isn't there a purpose here? Isn't there a cause worth standing up? Isn't Goliath challenging the armies of the living God reason to stand up like men and go to battle? And here this shepherd boy looks at all these soldiers and throws it right back at him. They're ridiculing him, mocking him, the few sheep. Little boy, what are you doing out here with all us men of war? And I want to develop the thought this morning. And it's a thought that I've developed before, but I felt led of the Lord again to do this. That the Lord will give your life meaning and purpose. He's able to do that. And in this culture, in this society, in any society of people, but it seems like it's rampant in ours, that people seem to be running around with no meaning or purpose, just trying to figure out how to get excited, trying to figure out how to find the next thrill, trying to figure out how to get through life doing as little as I possibly can. And that isn't the way of the child of God. And it wasn't David's way. He found meaning and purpose in serving the living Lord. And he got offended when Goliath challenged the armies of the living God. David knew his purpose, and it was to serve the Lord. David knew the meaning of his life, the purpose of his life, the cause for which God had put him on this planet, to bring glory to him. We're created to serve. We're created to worship. We're created to commune with the living Lord. And those things will give your life more meaning and more purpose. As David puts it in this and how it's translated, there's a cause. There's a cause to stand up. There's a cause to live according to the Word of God. There's a cause in all of these things. There's a meaning and a purpose, and God's able to give you that meaning and purpose. And we'll see that this morning, I trust, by the help of God, in David's life. David came to serve the Lord, and David's service is now going to involve fighting a giant. So let's begin reading in verse 42 of this same chapter. And for time's sake, we won't read it all. We could read the whole chapter. But starting in verse 42, and you remember the account. David says, well, I'll fight him, and it'll be just like when I fought the lion and the bear, and God delivered me, and I'm going to fight this guy. Who's he? Verse 42, and when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. He's just a fair-haired freckled kid. I don't know about the freckles, but just a kid. And this Goliath was outraged at this. David couldn't believe, or the Goliath couldn't believe that David was going to come and challenge him. He was, offended at it all. And he says in verse 42, he disdained him. Verse 43, and the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said unto David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and a spear, and with a shield. Notice this. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defiled. David tells us in verse 45 the cause for which he fought, the meaning and the purpose that the Lord had given him in life. I'm coming in the name of the Lord, Goliath. You come at me with the weapons of man. You come at me with a sword and a spear and a shield. I don't have any of those things. I'm coming to you in the name of the Lord. And look at the courage that this cause that David had upon his life, this purpose that David had in his life to glorify God, to serve God. Look at the courage that it gave him. Look at the steadfastness that it gave him. God's able to give you that courage and that steadfastness and that cause and that purpose and that meaning in your life. Notice what David says to the giant in verse 46. I say giant. He was just a huge man. And this day the Lord will deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and will take thine head from thee, and will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know. And this is the purpose of David's life, that all of the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. That was his purpose. To honor God, to exalt God. And that purpose that he had in his life gave him meaning, gave his life meaning. He knew what the cause was. He knew what direction he had to go. Now, he had to serve the Lord. He had to honor the Lord. He had to obey the Lord. He had to strive to glorify the Lord. Now, in David's case, and I'm thankful it's not in all of our cases, but in David's case, that meant go to physical combat with this massive individual that was schooled in war for his whole life, and go to combat with him to the death. And David said, if that's the task at hand, let's get at it. And the Goliath says to David, I'll have your head and I'll feed it to the fowl. And David says, I'll have your head and the armies of the Philistines, and the beasts and the fowl will eat from them. David doesn't back down an ounce. And that's the kind of thing that when the Lord, who is able, when the Lord gives you purpose, when you see in your life that we've been put upon this rock for a reason, and that reason is first to honor and glorify God, to serve the true and living God, and to bring glory to Him. And then what is involved in that is, well, I have to be in the Lord's will. I have to be in the Lord's Word. And we'll see those things unfold. But that's the kind of man David was. David emerges in this text as God's man. David emerges obviously from that battle, victorious. David is, and you can read it through the text where, the very famous sling and stone, and David knocks Goliath down and takes his own sword, Goliath's own sword, and beheads him. He's victorious, just as he said it would, and he knew that God would give him that victory. So David, of course, emerges onto the scene, he bursts onto the scene as this incredible man of valor, this incredible man of integrity, this incredible man that has a singular purpose in life. I'm going to serve God. Now, in the process of that, I had to kill Goliath, who was defying the armies of the living God. But he comes forth to the forefront in the minds of the people, and it's probably a pretty natural transition. And of course, God's at the heart of it all. Saul has, his reign has run its course and it's not gone well, and that's going to have to end, and they have to pick a new king, and that, of course, God's hand of approval is upon David. That becomes the easy choice. Look with me in 2 Samuel 5. 2 Samuel 5. Then came I'm in the first verse. Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that leddest out and broughtest in Israel. David had led many a victorious battle. Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king and to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, notice verse 5 carefully, in Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. So the kingdom is united under David, and they go into what we would call, I don't know if they still use the phrase, they go into their heyday. David has led them into, and we can read this in 2 Samuel 7 and verse 1. And it came to pass when the king sat in his house that the Lord had given him rest round about from all his enemies. David had been used of God to subdue so many. And again, this is 400 years after the successes of Joshua, and the rest that Joshua had, and the cycles that a nation goes through. But David was greatly used of God to subdue first Goliath. That's what thrust him on to the forefront of the popular scene. And then David leads army after army, military conflict after military conflict. And then God calls upon David to be king. And in all of that, David's purpose, and I know David was a man and he had his flaws, but in all of that, David's purpose was to serve the living God. In Acts chapter 13 and verse 22, you can read this for yourself, that in Acts 13:22, it is said that David is called a man after God's own heart. What God loved, he loved. What God hated, he hated. The directions that he went, that God went, David wanted to be going in that direction. David was given by God purpose and meaning. And that made his life a certain kind of life. That made his life very focused, very, very God-oriented. Now, not perfectly, I understand that. But I'm going back to that text where he shows up at the scene with Goliath and they ridicule him. Why are you there? Why are you doing what you're doing? What do you care? And he says, there's a cause here. There's a purpose here. And the rest of David's life demonstrated in the main that driven purpose that God had given him. You think about the fact that man is created to love the Lord. Man is created to serve the Lord. Man is created to honor the Lord with his life, striving to reflect the Lord. And when an individual sees that, when an individual, by the grace of God, like David, sees, he's angered when others defy the living God. He's angered at Goliath and he's outraged at the armies of Israel. Goliath is defying not the armies of Israel. We don't care about them. Goliath is not defying some certain soldier that is prominent in the armies of Israel. Phooey on all that. He's defying the living God. Now that's where I draw the line. And I'm not going to stand by the wayside and let this happen. And the rest of his life, he's fighting battles in the defense of the honor of God. And I know that he failed in a couple of those battles, right? I know that he was a flawed human being. But in his life, over the long run, the main of his life was driven to serve the Lord. Driven to bring honor to the Lord. And God's able to give meaning and purpose to everybody's life on that same level. He's not going to call you to be king of Israel. He's not going to necessarily call you to pick up a sword or a sling and a stone and do physical battle. There's a lot of things he may not call you to do that he called David to do, but in the main, the bullet points are the same. Serve him. Cut away the clutter and the distraction of life and put him first. Put the Lord first. And people will be just like David's brothers. What are you doing? Don't you know this and don't you know that? And why are you even here? What's your purpose? Well, I'll tell you what it is. My purpose is to serve the Lord. My purpose is to bring honor to him. What does that look like in an individual's life? If your purpose, like David's was, to serve the living God, to honor him, to obey him, what does that practically look like? And I picked 4 Psalms. You could look at a whole lot more, and you could look at a whole lot more illustrations. But I picked 4 excerpts of 4 Psalms to say, this is what it looks like. When one's life is by the grace of God giving meaning and purpose. And compare this to what you see so often in the culture, in society at large. People floundering around, desperately trying to find meaning in their life. People floundering around, desperately trying to find a singular purpose that gets them up and gets them moving in the morning. People floundering around and trying to find these things in altogether erroneous areas that leaves them disillusioned and disappointed and then turning to other kinds of less moral avenues, trying to find, if I can't find meaning and purpose, I'll find some kind of fulfillment through some kind of thrill, some kind of excess that will just be a thrill ride. And even those things, you have to constantly increase that. You have to constantly go farther and farther to keep that thrill. And if by the grace of God, God would show us the thrill and the satisfaction that there is in just serving the living Lord and having Him to be the reason I get up in the morning. I want to serve the Lord today. And having Him to be the reason that the reason I get up in the morning, I want to bring glory to Him. In Psalm, those 4 excerpts, Psalm 18 is where I'll start. Psalm 18. And I asked the question, what's it look like? What's it a man after God's own heart? That's how Acts 13:22 describes David. Psalm 18 and the first 3 verses. I will love Thee, O Lord, my strength. And now you'll notice in the heading, this is a Psalm of David. This is the one who faced Goliath. This is the one who was outraged that Goliath would challenge the living God. This is the one who stood against this giant of a man and said, you don't scare me. I don't come to you in my own power. I come to you in the strength of the Lord. I will love Thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler or shield, and the horn of my salvation, my high tower, my safe place. David said in that one passage, that one verse, the Lord is everything to me. He's all my strength. He's all my defense. He's all my stability. He's all my courage. He's my deliverer. He's my shield. He's my high tower. He's my safe place. You think about that high tower and the picture of that strategically secured military fortress that provides that safe haven that others can't get into. People need nowadays all kinds of safe places. There's provided for so many today in so many different situations, safe places. David says, the Lord's mine. That's where I run. The Lord's mine. And that's what begins to emerge as we look at this man after God's own heart who found his meaning and purpose in life in God. He said in verse 3, I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. What does it look like for David? What does it look like for anybody in our current day to have our meaning and purpose defined for us in our lives by serving the living God and having the goal of honoring Him? There's going to be some battles. Now David faced that battle with great courage, great confidence, because he didn't go in his own strength. He didn't map out his own goals. He was operating under the system that God had instructed him. He was operating under the system that I'm going in the name of the Lord and you're defying the name of the Lord. Now we're going to fix that. We're going to rectify that. And He's going to give me victory over you. His strength and his confidence came from the Lord. And the all very familiar 23rd Psalm. his completeness in the 23rd Psalm. The satisfaction that he found in knowing the Lord. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not lack. I shall not want. And I have confidence even in the valley of the shadow of death. I fear no evil, for thou art with me. This is what it looks like when one is singularly devoted to the Lord. And they find their purpose in the Lord. And that gives their life meaning. And He's able to do that still today. He's still the same God. And what that looks like is, in the 18th Psalm, he finds his strength and his confidence in the Lord. In the 23rd Psalm, he finds his courage and completeness in the Lord. These things that are so vastly lacking on so many fronts today in so many people. In Psalm 37, this is one of the key marks. Psalm 37. Verses 4 and 5. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and He shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in Him, and He shall bring it to pass. He's committed to the will of the Lord. He's committed to the honor of the Lord. Delight thyself also in Him, and He shall give thee the desires of thine heart. When the passion of your life is God-centered, when the purpose of your life is God-centered, you contrast that to the worldly way of thinking and looking. The purpose in my life is me-centered. The purpose of my life is my satisfaction. The purpose of my life is getting everything I want. And look at life and the struggles and the trials and the battles and the heartaches and the calamities. And so many times you say, oh, it didn't work. And you come up so discouraged. You come up so disillusioned. You come up so bewildered. Why didn't it work? Well, you're focusing on the wrong entity. But when you delight yourself in the Lord, He'll give thee the desires of thine heart, because the desires of thine heart are in accordance to what brings Him honor and glory. And you're delighting in Him and what brings Him honor and glory, and having you're repulsed at the things He's repulsed at. And then your way is committed to Him, and you're trusting in Him, and He's going to bring that to pass. There's not going to be disappointment. You find His will and walk in His will. David found His will, walked in it. He didn't walk out there against the Goliath and say, I hope this turns out okay. I wonder if this turns out. I don't know. We'll go see. He walks out there with confidence. He knew the will of the Lord. And the Lord brought it to pass. Today, Goliath, you're done. And your armies are done. And He brought that to pass. No disillusionment. No bewilderment. What happened? Why didn't this go like I planned? Why didn't I get what I want? None of that's there. None of that's there. Another thing that it looks like is found in Psalm 119. Psalm 119. I want you to notice a couple of verses there. Starting in 97. Psalm 119, 97. Oh, how love I thy law. It's my meditation all the day. What's one of the defining marks of a person who finds their purpose and meaning in the Lord. He needs, or she needs, they need, that person needs to know the Word of God. That person needs to know what thus saith the Lord. And David said, I love the law. I just love it. I love knowing what your Word tells me I should be doing and not doing. It's a good safe haven. It's a good boundary. Thou through thy commandments hast made me wiser than mine enemies, for they are ever with me. I have more understanding than all my teachers, for thy testimonies are my meditation. I understand more than the ancients, because I keep thy precepts. I have refrained my feet from every evil way, that I might keep thy word. I have not departed from thy judgments, for thou hast taught me. How sweet are thy words unto my taste, yea, sweeter than honey to my mouth. Through thy precepts I get understanding, therefore I hate every false way. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. That's what it looks like for a person of God to find his or her meaning and purpose in life, to serve the true and living God. From Psalm 18, you find in Him a safe place. From Psalm 23, you find in Him completeness, satisfaction. In Psalm 37, you find in Him His will and the direction for your life. In Psalm 19, you find in His Word the instructions for life. When God's the focus and center of your life, the things of the Lord will define you. The things of the Lord will be your roadmap. The things of the Lord will be the road that you travel on. The things of the Lord will be what takes you in a direction of serving Him and growing in that service and striving to bring glory to Him. Compare and contrast that to the world and the thinking of folks that have not the Lord. They make their goals, whatever the goal is. Let's say it's an honorable goal. I want to start a business. And they make their goal. And let's say they start the business and they reach their goal. And part of the goal of starting the business was that maybe because I wanted to do that because I wanted to make a good pile of money. Maybe I wanted to start the business so I could kind of set my own hours. Whatever the motivations are in that, running that business becomes hard work. Maybe the business flourishes, maybe the business doesn't. Maybe they're able to set their own hours, maybe they have to work 80 hours a week. And there's a lot of disappointment that could crop up in all of that. And then they can get easily discouraged, easily disillusioned. Or let's flip that business the other way, and it goes well. And they make a good amount of money. And they live comfortably, and they can set their own hours. And they get to that point, and they go, now I'm bored. Now what do I do? I'm so used to moving and going. I'm so used to being active and being engaged, and I don't know what to do now. And maybe the goal is to reach $1 million. Maybe the goal is to accomplish a certain thing. And you reach that level, or you accomplish that certain thing, and you get there and go, big deal. That dude over there's got twice the amount. She over there, she's accomplished twice of what I've accomplished. When we set our goals, when we have the purpose of our life to be something of a small personal goal that's self-centered, or a large personal goal but it's self-centered. How many times do you see people reach those plateaus and still be dissatisfied? They still want more. The grass is still taller and greener somewhere else. Or you make those plans and you don't involve God in any of it, like the culture wouldn't. You make those plans and every day you're worried. Every day. You don't go out like David faced Goliath in confidence and in conviction and in a knowledge that God is with me. But you make, without God as the center of your thought process, you just make these earthly goals that are designed to satisfy me, and every day you wake up and you're worried. Every day you wake up and you're wondering, is it going to fall apart today? And you look around at what's going on in the world, and there's a lot of stuff falling apart today. And maybe today's the day I lose it all. Maybe today's the day my whole plan comes unraveled. And you live in constant worry. Because you didn't include God. You didn't make Him the center of the thought process of starting out on that journey. You're just in it for you. But God's able to overcome all of that. God's able to give you life, meaning, and purpose. What happens when you have these plans and goals and dreams and aspirations and you come to the end of your own strength, and that's all you have because you haven't included God in any of the process? You come to the end of your own strength and you crash and burn, and it's a total failure. And then you sit in a pile of rubble and say, I got no hope. It's all gone. Everything I committed the last X number of years to is up in smoke. Everything I committed all this energy, blood, sweat, and tears to, it's gone. It means nothing. See, David didn't experience those kinds of things in his service to the Lord. Everything he did meant something. Everything he did had a purpose behind it, and that was to honor God. Every line he drew in the sand was to defend the reputation of God. When he was going in the right direction, when he was thinking properly, we know there's times he wasn't, but when he was thinking properly, every decision that he made was, does this honor God or not? Does this go in a direction that would bring glory to Him or not? Does this go in a direction that would be in accordance to His Word or not? God's able to give your life meaning and purpose. Contrast that and what we see from David's life and the things that David wrote and the experiences that David had. Contrast that to what you see in the world. And the absolute disillusionment that so many people live with on a daily basis. I was near a person the other day that sneezed. He just sneezed. And he said, you know, when you sneeze, your heart stops beating for a second. He said, unfortunately, mine started back up. He sneezed, not me. And he's disillusioned in life. He's implying that he'd rather his heart didn't start back up after he sneezed. So many people walk around today like that. And even so many people that claim to be Christians that are so self-centered. They get so disillusioned because I didn't get what I wanted. The focus is wrong. Look at David and his focus when he was thinking properly. Goliath, who do you think you are? You're going down today. And he faces that giant. And maybe there's some giants in your life that you need to face. Look to the one who is altogether higher than you to give your life purpose and meaning. And when you're walking in His will, you'll know He's there with you. And when the challenges come up, you'll know He's your strength. And when the pitfalls come, you'll know He's doing all things for your good and His glory. And even what would seem like failures, He closed the door here, maybe because He was opening a door here. And when you're serving the Lord, He's able to do those kinds of things. Look at the men and women in the Bible that are held up to us like David. Look at Hebrews 11. And the things that faith enabled those men and women to do. The things the successes that they had in their life. And Hebrews 11:13 said they died in faith. They lived their lives in absolute confidence and went to their graves in absolute confidence. The Lord was enabling me to do this. And I did it. And you read the different accounts of the different things the different men and women of Hebrews 11 did. It's got to start with one thing. An individual recognizing God as God. God is creator. And God has created you to serve, worship, and honor Him. And then it's got to start with that, but it's got to move into something more personal and more intimate. Where you as an individual see your need of a living Lord governing your life. And that you bow before Him in repentance and faith and surrender your life as Paul did. Lord, what wilt Thou have me do? In that kind of a moment, when you surrender yourself before God and say, here, take me and use me, direct me, strengthen me. I'll do my best to bring honor to You. That will give your life purpose and meaning far beyond anything else the world can chase. But it starts with knowing the Lord. If we can point you to Him, if we can show you Him and how to have a right relationship with Him, let us know as we stand, as we sing.